interaction, written or oral, between someone telling a story and one or more listeners. It is a well-known and powerful means of communicating messages and engaging audiences. Humankind has been telling stories for ages. It has been a method used to make sense of the environment, organize experience and ideas, and it has been used to create shared understanding with the whole community. It is an art form with the purpose to educate, inspire, and communicate values and cultural traditions. Storytelling typically follows a structure that describes the cause-effect relationships between events and occur over a specific time, and that affects a group of individuals. It is often interactive and can help the listeners to cultivate their imagination. Storytelling has the potential to generate a shared understanding among people about a situation, a topic, or a problem. And through its engaging nature, it has the potential to attract and sustain interest and enable audiences to make meaningful connections. Another advantage of storytelling is that it's often easily accessible and does not require the audience to have expert knowledge to understand and associate with the knowledge that is being communicated. It is also in the narrative form in which most people receive the news and information. Storytelling exists in different forms, and there are many different techniques. It can be applied to visually describe a narrative using different mediums such as video, photography, or graphics, illustrations, in what is usually called visual storytelling. Sometimes we can even sing the stories and they become cantatas, musicals, and even operas. Something relatively new is to go digital in storytelling, that is, using our modern digital means that makes it possible for essentially anyone to share their stories. Of course, storytelling often exists in traditional forms as well, such as in theatrical performances. Today we are going to hear several researchers and lecturers explaining how to develop storytelling in different formats and from different perspectives. So we are all ears. Tell us about it. Now, Llorenç, the head of our research group, the leader of our research group, Grell, is going to say some words as well.
Is this working? Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Molt bon dia a tots i a totes. Com a cap del Departament de Filologia i Didàctica de la Llengua i la Literatura de la Universitat de Vic, volia donar la benvinguda a tots els alumnes, sobretot, i també als ponents del segon congrés Storytelling Revisited, Gender, Language, Music and Cinema in Children's Literature. Thank you for being here and for participating in this conference. As you know, conferences do not just happen, but have a team of enthusiastic people behind who organize and make sure that everything runs smoothly, like in this conference. For this reason, I would like to thank the organizing committee composed of Núria Medina Casanovas, Mireia Canals Botines, and Núria Camps Casals, present right here. Okay, yeah, we can applaud that. Yeah. That's a good start, you know. I want to thank them for their dedication and passion, if I may say so, in organizing this already second edition of the conference. I also want to thank the three research groups who have sponsored the conference, and they are the Grell, Getly, and also Texlico, and also the Office of Research of our university for partly funding this conference. I hope that all the papers that you will discuss today in such a broad range of disciplines that are all united by the storytelling topic are an opportunity both for students and scholars to advance in the teaching of languages and literatures from the enriched perspective that disciplines such as gender, language, music, and cinema bring. I hope you have a great conference.
Okay. Thank you, Llorenç, and thank you, Núria and Mireia. And we are going to start listening to Dr. Heather Caswell, and Mireia is going to present her. So over to you. Yes, thank you.
Good morning. Oops. Do you hear me? Yeah. Good morning to you all. Thank you for being here. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our first and keynote speaker, who's Heather Caswell. Heather Caswell, I'm going to read your biodata, but first of all, I would like to just let you know that it is an emotional link between her and me, because I was living in the place where she lives, in Emporia, Kansas, the US. And so for me, it's emotionally linked, the relationship between BIC and Emporia, which are pretty similar universities, pretty similar settings. So I think that this is the start of a great friendship, applying to cinema. But, well, Heather Caswell is a PhD and is a National Board Certified Teacher in Early and Middle School Childhood Literacy, Reading Language Arts, ages 3 to 12. She's currently an associate professor in the Department of Elementary Early Childhood Special Education in the Teachers College at Emporia State University. Caswell has teaching experience in early childhood elementary education, supervising pre-service teachers and teaching undergraduate and graduate candidates. As a national writing project teacher consultant, Caswell has presented at the international, national, state, and district levels, focusing on writing and visual literacy. So let's see, the floor is yours, so it's up to you. Thank you, Heather Caswell, for being with us.
All right. Good morning. So yes, I am from Emporia, and you can see on the map, I've marked where I am from, right in the middle of the United States. And I would like to start by introducing myself through writing. We're here for a Storytelling Revisited conference. So I'd like to introduce myself through a piece that I've written, I Am From structure. And so the first part of the poem actually presents my childhood. So it reflects things that had happened in my childhood. And then the last part is professional. So I am from Florida sunsets, backyard adventures, where day-long imaginary journeys began in sunlight and found closure at dark, where the sound of cowbells signaled homeward bound goodbyes and sleepy eyes. I am from imaginary worlds derived from words on paper, a mother's voice, and flashlight reading, where dreams became a story's continuation. I am from the Flint Hills, rolling Flint Hills and the sound of howling winds, backyard baseball fields, and broken windows. From third grade classrooms and twirling bar competitions, where learning turned into schooling and answering questions became right or wrong. I am from an artist's perspective, an entomologist's analysis, where life's journeys began with creativity, inquisitive dialogue, and welcomed questions. I am from limestone buildings and educational theory, where theory transforms to pedagogy. Children's voices empower curriculum. Learners orchestrate a melody of instruction and compose a script beyond standardized learning. I am from an aged red brick school building where first experiences are celebrated, a caring and kind chain hugs the room like winter garland, and imaginary kitchens turn into elaborate spaceships. I am from collaborative conversation where multiple voices and multiple perspectives are discovered through ongoing dialogue, where crafting of self is the journey, not the destination. So I am here to share that journey with you in thinking about how do we awaken the innate nature of storytelling in children through art, conversation, and observation. So my journey starts by thinking about this idea that John Berger actually presented in 1972, that seeing comes before words. And so thinking about the majority of us, because we all see, hopefully I believe in this room we are all able to see. And so we live in a visual culture, right? Everything around us sends a signal to us of where we're at, what we're doing. So it actually communicates to us because of the language that we've learned to connect to that visual culture. And so I'm here to think about how do children connect what they've seen from early on to creating that language to communicate, and how sometimes maybe we as adults might be barriers to that, right? We might be able to get in the way of that. So I'd like you to take a moment. I'm going to ask you to do some reflecting and thinking. And I'm going to ask you to take a moment and think about an experience in your childhood where you've been engaged in creating. So I'll give you a moment to recall that picture, that visual image of what you did. All right, do you have it? Okay. So I'd like you to do some thinking, reflecting on that moment. So recalling information, so it would be storytelling in your mind, right, to yourself, recalling memories and moments. And I'd like you to do some reflection on what that moment was like. So where did this experience take place? So can you visualize that experience and where it took place? What were you creating? So what medium did you use? Was it canvas, paper, clay? Were you writing? Was it something else? Whose ideas guided the creativity? So this is where, in my third grade classroom, answering questions became right or wrong. So who guided? Was it your own idea that just kept guiding your creativity? Or did an adult idea kind of step in and guide and model? Or was it co-creating? So were you an adult and a child creating together? So who made the decisions while you were creating? How much time did you have to create? Was it ongoing, day after day? You got to come back and keep working on it? Or did it stop and you didn't get to go any further? By choice, or maybe not by choice. What happened after you created? So was it put away? Was it displayed? Was it shared? Was it forgotten? Right? These are things to think about. So as I share my journey and I share some of the observations I've had with the children I've worked with over the last few years, I want this to kind of be playing in our mind, right? So who's making the decision and they're creating, who's guiding, who's supporting, and thinking about what happens after we create, right? So here are my observations so far in my work, which all of these we probably already know, but I'm going to remind you of that this morning. So children by nature are confident, imaginative, and creative storytellers. And this is visible in their play, in their conversation, and the way in which they view the world. But children need time, they need choice, and they need space to continue to develop these innate characteristics. And what I've seen over time is if we take those away, then the creativity starts to go away, right? Children are taught to live within a prescribed cultural boundaries. So again, that's that visual culture, right? We're teaching children language to describe the cultures that we live in, so those boundaries. If we approach our work with children through a process lens, then we create relationships and learning spaces that awaken this innate creativity and this nature in storytelling. So the first question I have to ask is, what is the role of storytelling in our lives? And I am so excited that we began this conversation earlier. And so I'd like to reflect just a little bit with a video that I feel finds the answer to this question, or at least part of the answer to this question.
Hey, Pete.
Oh, hey, Val.
How's it going?
You know what? I'm having a really bad day.
What happened?
See, what Val's saying when she says, what happened is, tell me a story. And that's actually what this season of Pixar in a Box is all about.
To make a movie here at Pixar takes years, but it all starts with a story. Humans have been telling stories since we could speak, probably even before. We tell stories around the campfire. We write plays, we write novels, short stories, we make movies, we take photographs, tweet to each other, the list goes on. The power of story is that it has an ability to connect with people on an emotional level. One of the things you hear all the time, this advice, is write what you know. Now, as a kid, I was like, I don't want to write about suburban Minnesota. That's boring. I want to write about explosions and monsters and car chases. Well, what that actually means is, yeah, go ahead and write about monsters and explosions and car chases, but put something into it that talks about your own life, how you feel. Do you feel scared? Do you feel alone? Something from your own life will make that story come alive and not just be a boring car chase. When I started directing Monsters Incorporated, the way I would pitch it is, it's about a monster who scares kids for a living. That's his job. He clocks in, he clocks out, he eats donuts and talks about union dues, and we thought that was a pretty funny idea. And sure enough, when I would tell it to people, they would smile. But when we told the story as a film, people started getting bored and restless, and they're like, I don't understand what this movie is about. Well, what I finally figured out was that it's actually not about a monster who scares kids. It's about a man becoming a father. And that was what was happening to me. So why write about what you know? Well, it's because probably what happened to you made you feel some particular way. And what you're trying to do really when you tell a story is to get the audience to have that same feeling. One of the big revelations for me telling stories is how much work they are, really. I always thought you just tell the story once and it would be perfect, and geniuses like Walt Disney or Miyazaki, this brilliance comes out of their head once and there it is. Well, the truth is, our stories don't always come out exactly perfectly the first time, or the second time, or the third time, or the fourth time, up to the 30th time. And so you keep going again and again and again. And only after retelling the story many, many times does it really sparkle. This season of Pixar in a Box is about how we at Pixar tell our stories, in hopes that it will inspire you to tell yours.
But seriously, what happened?
So the first thing, I get to my death.
So storytelling, we find, is really that practice, that rehearsal, right, of telling the story, but also weaving into it what we know and who we are, right? And hopefully in the examples that I'm going to show you today, you'll be able to see evidence of even young children doing that very naturally. So how do we create a space for this creativity and storytelling, that time, that support without that control, right? And so here are some things that I feel that as adults, we need to ask ourselves to be able to focus on that creativity, right? So creating a workshop approach or a workshop environment, looking at process over product. So thinking back to that video and how he was saying how many times he had to write and rewrite and be able to explore his ideas to be able to come up with something he was really wanting to create and to share. Art is inquiry. And then, of course, the importance of observation and child-directed conversation. So I'm going to use these as our guiding talking points today and share examples as we go through this. So let's first look at creating a workshop environment. So here are some things I feel like we have to be, as adults, cautious of and aware of. So in many social constructs, adults are in the authority over children, right? We're usually supervising or the authority kind of sharing our thinking of the world and how to interpret that world. But in order for a workshop approach to be effective and to contribute to this development of writers and creative thinkers, this social construct has to change a bit within a workshop approach and allow the authority to shift to the young writer. And then also the other thing I think we need to be aware of is that children are oppressed within our population, right? Adults are making decisions within an environment or within the world, and so they are not always a decision maker. And so what we have to think about is how does this contribute to the conversation? You know, are we guiding the conversation, or are we listening and allowing the conversation to be guided by the child's thoughts and the child's thinking? And so we have to think about these daily decision makings and the interactions that we have with the children as they're writing. So as young writers write, we must allow them to feel empowered to make choices about how they write, why they write, what they write, and try to support that as they're working. So here's an example of what that looks like within the work that I've been doing. And what you have here is a little girl who is created a space for herself and using more of a storyboard format. So she selected this way of putting writing on paper. And so she's drawing pictures and, of course, writing within the boxes or outside the boxes. The top picture up there has a little boy who has his space all set up with his drawings, kind of as an inspiration right in front of him, so he can kind of be looking at that. And then he has notes within his notebook, and he has his paper that he's selected, and I believe he's chosen kind of to draw and write together. And then the bottom middle actually has kind of this visual way of representing thinking. So he has a whole bunch of little icons and little thinking that he's putting together as he's creating his story. And then the last one over on this side, you can see, again, she's been influenced by this type of writing paper, but she created her own, right? So she decided to draw a picture in a box that she created, and she decided to write her words below on lines. But she also noticed, if you also notice that she probably got tired from the handwriting and the fine motor, and so she allowed for an adult to step in and support in continuing that writing. So one thing I think we should think about as we continue to work with children is that we observe writers in the world. We even heard one who shared his process. All writers move through a writing process that includes pre-writing or drafting, revising, editing, all of those things that we know writers do. But what we don't want to do is teach children that there's only one writing process, right? That there's one way to approach writing. But rather, we want each of them to find their own writing process and to find their own way to work through writing. And it's going to look different for every writer and every child, right? So the next point I wanted to talk about was the process versus product perspective. So we want to allow writers to consider which medium will be best to tell their story. And so this will allow for their story to fill the space rather than the space to accommodate what their story looks like. The next part that we want to think about is we allow the decision-making to take place and that we value the individual's writing process. So really thinking about how they work through that writing and develop and craft that approach. And then the last thinking that I want to share here with the process versus product is to think about our role again as adults, as an observer. So thinking about how do we observe young children in their decision making and insert that in support only when it's needed. So knowing when to step back and allow them to create and knowing when to step in and support when we need to. And a lot of this is done through that rehearsing practice, right? And these two young children, to me, were a perfect model of this rehearsing. So they created a story together, right? In this little blank book that they had created. They were working hard at talking through their story, drawing their images, and thinking about what their story should be. But then when they got in front of their peers and they were sharing their peers with their story with their peers, the story became more and more elaborate with every moment that they shared their story, telling it again and again with more detail. So that rehearsal is key, that time to be able to practice and retell. So here's an example of what this could look like within 2D and 3D art when it's incorporated into the storytelling. So when this child started to create their character or their creature that they named Spot, it started out as orange. And if you notice when they went down to the next drawing that they created, it changed to blue, right? So now it's just blue with this kind of glow of orange. And it also gained a tail. And so through the thinking, there's some brainstorming that's up there of like where the Spot lives and what type of environment Spot lives in. And then the creature was created in 3D, so using clay. And so as the child created this clay version, if you notice, a Spot is very flat, right? And so his clay version is very, very flat. And his tail is not attached yet. So here's the story that was written as Spot was being created. So Spot's being created through 2D drawings and sketches. And as he's drawing and sketching Spot, this child is able to start kind of rehearsing that story, right? Thinking about who that creature is and who that character is. And so here's how the elements of that art have come out. So he has a furry and soft, and he has a tail. And then if we talk about thinking back to storytelling and how we weave in to that creative process our own lives, right, and write about what we know. So this child has written about baseball, and he plays baseball, and so he's done this like commentary of what baseball is and calling out the baseball game, and so that becomes part of his story as well. So this idea of incorporating art as process writing and art as thinking through storytelling. And so if we can think of art as not an end product, but as a vehicle for inquiry and creating. So here are a few things to think about is how can 2D and 3D art create spaces for potential development of characters and settings? And then also, how can children mix their understanding of the world they live in with an exploration of the world of the characters that they're creating? And then thinking about this process of creating 2 and 3D art to become both a pre-writing and a revising element of writing when children are drafting their stories. And so here's an example of how this art played a role, especially when we start to integrate painting on canvas. So this is the child who decided to do the storyboard writing with her character. And if you notice, it starts out in blue water, right? The water is blue and the character is purple. But as she talks through her story and tells about her character, the character begins to get orange stripes, right? And little dots, polka dots with little yellow and orange colors. And then when she paints, she starts to create the environment and space around her differently. So you see the oranges and the purples are all starting to come into the water space. And when she's writing her story, she starts to add that into her story too, right? It becomes part of who her character is. So when she woke up, she turned her water different colors with magical powers, right? And here's another example how the drawing and the sculpting can really allow space for children to write and draft and revise. And so here, if you notice the stretched out wings, right, of Play, this creature that was created by a 6-year-old, and what you notice is that there's a lot of focus on flying within his story. He does a lot of talking about how Play flies through the air and swoops down to fish, but he really talks about when going fast that he puts out his wings straight so that he can glide. So that thought process that he's having as he's going through this is very interesting to observe. So here's Arabella the fairy, and Arabella the fairy was created here in drawing first, and then she's comparing her drawing to her clay work and thinking about this clay structure. And if you notice, her beads are really spread out over here, but as she's creating the clay, they get shrunk up and kind of pushed together. And so she's worked that into her storytelling, right? She talks about the beads and how she shrinks up when she wants to be hidden, and then she can shed the beads as well. And so that thinking comes out in her creating of the creatures. So the last thing I want to talk to you about this morning is I would like to talk to you about the importance of observation and child-directed conversation. So again, during these processes of creating, children are being able to talk to adults or to other children and being listened to and what their story's about, and ask questions like, tell me more, or what do you mean by that? And so this is one example here in Arabella's story where she goes on and on and on to talk about friends, right? She lists a lot of friends. And one of the adults, the first thing wanted to do was step in and say, no, these are enough friends. You don't need to include any more friends in your story. But if that would have happened, if the adult would have acted on that instinct, that adult thinking, if you notice, there's a lot of talk about friends, right? Friends protect her, right? Friends are also there to dance with her outside or to play with her. And so friends are a very important part of her story. And so through that drafting and that rehearsal, if those friends weren't a part of what she was thinking about or able to think about, those parts of the story would probably have been left out purposely because of that adult conversation. So as adults, our worldly knowledge and assumptions can sometimes get in the way of the creative process. And so we want to be conscious and aware of what we say and how we say it to young children. It is also essential that adults use their knowledge to support and facilitate and aid rather than actually guide, controlling or guiding the exposure of creativity. And then, of course, making sure that we put our own agenda aside, right? Like, oh, you don't need to name all those friends. That would be our own agenda, right? But the child wanted to, so she needs to be able to do that. So here are some examples of this as children get older, so ages 9 and 10. This creature was Spike the Dragon and was created with 2D drawing and then, of course, the 3D drawing woven into the writing process. And you'll notice that this starts to have that structure of storytelling, right? Once upon a time. And then you have some really kind of this imaginary kingdom, right? But then you end up having a problem and a solution, right? The dragon gets in trouble because the people think that he's the problem, that Spike's the problem. But evidently, in the end of the story, of course, it's not true, right? So these are examples, again, of weaving in what they know about storytelling and what they know about their own lives into the work that they do. So here's an example of Tally Alley, the turtle shark bird. And Tally Alley was inspired by a visit to an aquarium where a turtle had been rescued and had to have its front limb removed because it had gotten caught in a net. And so here she talks a little bit about who her creature is. And then she also is able to expand on that experience of her own life and what the turtle losing that limb might feel like. And then she returns back to that creative side of thinking about who this turtle shark bird knows and kind of their friends and who they interact with. So again, I feel like we have to ask ourselves as adults to focus on the following, right? So creating a workshop environment, process versus product, perspective, art is inquiry, the importance and observation of child-directed conversation. And I feel like through this and through art is a way that we can invite children to tell their story. So the examples that I've just shared with you today are examples that were from a bigger project that we did at my university with Dr. Carol Russell, who did a children-inspired glass project, and I was the literacy kind of consultant for that portion. And I want to share with you just a short video that kind of puts this work into a bigger context. They worked to create creatures and stories to then partner with the art program to create the creature in glass. And so I'd like to just share this a little bit with you in closing.
Arabella the fairy. My fairy lives in a fan. It eats magic, and her name is Arabella. She has friends, and their names are Kelsey, Divinity, Charlie, Wesley, Norma, Robin, Hannah, Jasmine, Rachel, Nikki, Aspen, Aaron, Naomi, Audrey, Lucy, Ann, Coda, Eli. She is a princess. And another friend was Sarah, Avery, Mrs. Decker, Mrs. Thuma, Mrs. Tolton, and many more. Her favorite thing to do is dance with her friends. To protect herself, she can turn into a necklace. The people in the house think she is a necklace. They wear her and she escapes outside to play and dance with her many friends. She lives in a house with people for protection from animals like frogs who wants to eat her. She is about 4 inches tall and it is easier for her to blend in with jewelry. She can also shrink when she needs to by shedding beads and folding her wings. She talks to boys and girls when she knows they are very, very, very nice.
They have to be very, very, very nice.
This is her hair, and these are what turns into a bee.
It's very
They go like
important.
that, and then they turn into a bee.
Very important too.
These are her wings, and she is named Irma. And she has colorful beads.
We were delighted to hear about the project, and we were very excited that she got to be a part of it, but we had no idea until we actually did it how spectacular it would really be. It was absolutely wonderful. So well organized, all the steps, and it was wonderful to see her go from thinking of drawings, to then thinking in 3 dimensions, and I hadn't seen her do any sculpture before, so that was a first for me. And then watching her gain confidence and be assertive about the design, it was really wonderful. We really appreciate being a part of it.
Staff was, and the faculty, and Matt was just wonderful about encouraging Lauren to be creative and draw what she wanted to create, and then
So that was one of
getting
the
her to talk about the story. To fill in
the
the
glass
details. And
artists
then,
who was talking, so they were there
when it came
consulting
time to
as
turn
well.
it, and we had the turn it into the colored sculpture, and she had the glass, the clear glass one. There were things about it that he asked you about how you wanted to do it differently. What kinds of things did you have him change?
The wings, I made him, just open him up a little more.
You wanted the wings wider, and he asked about her hair.
A little bit where in front.
So during the glass creating, they created a clear sculpture, and then they had this conversation between artists. So the adult artist of the glass actually had a conversation with the young artist and asking what needs to look different, how does it need to change, what should we do differently in the colored piece. And so there's this empowerment, right, of child voice to be able to talk through the creation of the creature and continuing this storytelling through this creation.
Yeah, you wanted her hair in front. So it was neat to have him do that and make her feel like she was really the artist, that she had, it should capture her visions for how it should be. And they were really good at that. And the more they did that, the more Lauren felt comfortable actually taking control of that and feeling empowered to be the artist. So that was fun, wasn't it? It came out just like you wanted it. So.
That was great, and it was good that they managed the parents too, because when they said, do you need to change anything about this? And she started listing things to change, and I was saying, no, like I felt like maybe she was being, a little too assertive, but she was absolutely doing, it was all about the confidence and having control over the final product, and you did a wonderful job of managing the kids and everybody to get the full potential.
It was neat to see the students too in the art program, how they wanted to interact with her and to give them that opportunity. So that was really, I think, neat for them as well as for us. So it was tremendous. I hope it's something that gets to be continued and expanded, because I think other children and other little ones should have that opportunity no matter how old they are.
So if you are a YouTube user, you can visit YouTube Children Inspire Glass, and there are several other creatures that are also on display there. So, right. So I was told to leave a little bit of time for questions, discussion, answer. Yeah, okay. All right. Oops, somebody said I'm not here.
Thank you very much, Heather. It was really, really interesting suggesting for the researchers, for the professors, and for the students, for pre-service teachers already, so many bunch of ideas for them, and also for the final dissertations, because I acknowledge that there are some here that are very interested in art and storytelling. So thank you. Any questions for Heather as well? Well, I actually have one, if you don't mind. Well, taking into consideration that art and storytelling are really inside and intertwined, do you think this art creating a space should be included in the school's curriculum? Well, in fact, I don't know, but is it a room for it in your primary school classes, or?
That's a very good question. One debated quite a bit in the United States. I don't know how familiar you are with the United States school structure, but this project was done outside of the boundaries of school. And part of it is because within the boundaries of school, it is probably not as well welcomed. That's why in my I Am From a poem I talked about standardized, looking at, environments of learning that are child-directed. But I do think it deserves space in the classroom, and that's why we document through these images and through these types of ways, because we do want it to become part of the classroom again. And I do think it's very interesting because our arts are being cut within our schools, and so they're putting more time into academics such as math and reading, so those very academic types of skills, rather than understanding that when we incorporate all of this in through art, we're really developing those skills as well, right? So yes, I believe it deserves space, but it doesn't have space at this time. And I do think it's interesting, the time that we put into this project outside of school is more time than they have inside of the school environment for their art classes and their art time. And we only met for half a year for probably 2 days a week in the afternoon, so which is sad.
Yeah, it is. Well, and then asking about narrative structures, which is the field that I'm really interested in, and then links that with art and with other sorts of spaces in relation to that. I think that I understood the process, but you start by the character, right? So you start creating the character, and then my question is that, and then do you develop the story structure, or do you just leave them the freedom to just state the structure they want, or just being descriptive, or how do you manage that? Because I think that you focus first on the character, right?
Correct. Yeah. Okay. So again, looking through that process lens, right? All of that, the examples that were shared today were process writing. So they weren't pieces of writing that were really fully developed into a piece that was to be published. These are all just the process, the writing that goes along with thinking. So with that in mind, you're right, we start with the creature, so they develop that character first. And so the focus is really on on that creature at the center and then developing that story around the creature. And so a lot of it is right now just allowing them to go any direction that they want to go. And if I were to put this into an instructional space within our environment with schooling, there might be some more guiding about looking at picture books or looking at, which you saw some examples in some of the older children, that understanding of story came out, that structure naturally. Whereas the younger children who were maybe early phases of schooling were much more broader in their, they were kind of all over the place in their thinking and creativity. So.
Yes, well, in fact, it's what you just said. It's our creation, right? So that's the space that you have to just provoke them, and then, okay.
And if our focus is on the creating and the storytelling in their own way, again, we weren't putting our adult thinking into their space. We were trying to stay back and allow them to create. So that was why we didn't necessarily ask for a structure or for a certain way in which it's told.
Okay, very, very, very interesting. Well, thank you very much again for your contribution, and then you're welcome again. Thank you very much.
It's a gender question.
Bon dia. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to introduce Drs. Davide Caperucci and Mariana Piccioli. Davide Caperucci is a senior researcher at the University of Florence, where he teaches experimental pedagogy and theories of instructional design and assessment methods. His research focuses on educational research methods, prevention of dropout and early school leaving, personalization of learning, assessment, certification of achievements and social inclusion, school self-evaluation and quality assurance. He has participated in several local, national and international research projects funded by the Italian Ministry of Education, the UNESCO and the European Union. He is author of several books and articles in the field of teaching and learning. Mariana Piccioli holds a PhD from the University of Florence and the University of Vic. She is a research fellow at the Forlizzi Department of the University of Florence, and her research interests focus on disability studies, on the evaluation of qualitative levels of school inclusion through the use of the Index for Inclusion, and more generally on pedagogy and special teaching. The title of the presentation is Storytelling for Inclusion, so let's listen to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. My name is Davide Caperucci. I'm here with my colleague, Mariana Piccioli, for this conference. We are very happy to come back to the University of Vic, so we would like to thank all the colleagues and friends from here for having invited us, and it's really always a pleasure to be with you. As you see from the title of our presentation, we try to focus on the connection between storytelling and inclusion. Basically, we work with the future special educators or teachers. So we lead research in the field of special education and also for pre-service and in-service teachers. That's why when our colleagues from the University of Vic invited us to present a paper in this conference, we try to present the outcomes of some research we are leading in this field. So that's why we have considered storytelling as a tool to promote school inclusion for children with disabilities. And in this case, we will try to use and present a special kind of storytelling, what we have considered a specific kind of storytelling for children with autism. I don't know how familiar you are with autistic spectrum children, with children with autism, Asperger's syndrome children. We will talk about these diagnostic and general aspects about autism and how storytelling can be a good and effective tool to include them into schools. This is the perspective we consider storytelling as a tool to work with children with disability. The approach we have underlined, we moved from, is the approach based on disability studies with particular attention to pupils with autism. The disability studies approach is a new approach which has been developed quite recently, at least in Europe. And here you found some international and national references about this approach. We try to implement school inclusion more than school integration. There are two different concepts strictly correlated with children with disability. The inclusion consider that the school environment has to change according to children's needs and not the opposite. The child that has to be adapted to the school environment and the school organization. That's the main umbrella, the main theoretical perspective. We look at disabilities and we look at the inclusion of children with disability. These are the two main questions we started reflecting on storytelling as a tool for inclusion. How storytelling can promote the school inclusion of pupils with autism. Is it effective or not? Could be effective or not. What types of storytelling can contribute to the development of cognitive, social, and relational competencies of pupils with autism? We will tell you something more about the characteristics that children with autism present, but anyway, you probably know, you're familiar with the problems they have from a relational and communicative perspective. So storytelling could be a certain of proposal to work and to develop processes for the inclusion of these kind of children, also for developing their abilities connected to communication and to school integration. Just some theoretical ideas about storytelling and how it can be used. It could be used with children with autism or with disability as a whole. We have seen, looking at the national and international literature, that we can find a very close link between storytelling and the human race, because it is something that belonged to the Homo sapiens, but it is something that still belongs to the Homo digitalis of today's society. And someone says that men and women not only have stories to tell, as we have seen before, for example, but they are the story they tell. They put themselves into the story they tell. And we think that it is absolutely true. In this sense, storytelling reinterprets in a new way and with different tools a natural propensity of attitude of human beings to tell about themselves, to build memories capable of projecting the past into the future. Through storytelling, we have seen at the very beginning of your activity, thank you so much for that. Thanks to storytelling, we can build up a sort of bridge between the past experiences that could be very different, they can vary a lot. Try to build up a sort of bridge between the past and the present experience. And this is something very useful that help us and also the children to reflect on their own experiences. Another important aspect we intended to underline is the use that we can make of storytelling for promoting socialization and communication skills, which are probably the biggest problems that children with autism or with Asperger's syndrome have. In this way, storytellings are simulation of social world. It's also a way to practice socialization. It is also a way to try to imagine ourselves in different contexts, in different situations. So storytelling are simulation of other worlds, other places, other lives, for example, capable of developing skills of socialization and communication that the story listener acquires and consolidates progressively by adapting them to various contexts, to different situations, as I said. By coming into contact with the stories, the child discovers new emotion. It doesn't discover only new places, new people, new characters. It becomes more familiar with the emotion. Probably he feels differently from the beginning of the story when he reached the end. And in this emotion discovery, the child is able to manage new emotions, new feelings, and is also able to regulate, to adapt them to different situations, different contexts. In this way, storytelling can be considered really as an adaptive tools that we can use with any kind of children. And I think that also future teacher should be able to manage this adaptive attitude for to be a good teacher and to use with their children. And we think that storytelling could be a useful tool also to promote empathy development. Probably the majority of you already know what empathy is. But through a story, we learn many new things. But as you know, probably it's more difficult to learn an emotion if you don't live it on your own, on yourself. But thanks to the story, we can put the child in new situation, in situation that he has already experienced in the past. And so to make it not just the environment, but also the feeling that are the object of the story. That's why storytelling could be and can be a good tool to develop also the empathic understanding which stay underneath the story. Frida, for example, a couple of decades ago, said that the connection between experiencing an emotion and triggering an action related to it involved different phases, and he summarized these phases in this way. We start with the codification of the event. The child get into contact with new events. Then he evaluates the type of emotion generated by this event. Then we pass to the evaluation of the meaning and intensity of the emotion generated by the event. I have already experienced, I have already felt this emotion or not. And then we have the preparation for the action, the pre-action, and the action itself. And this is useful, I think, to see how emotion generate behavior and interventions. And we have to be very aware about that. Yeah, we have already seen, I think, this aspect in the previous presentation. Thanks to storytelling, we can work on discovery the reality, so we can have realistic storytelling. But storytelling can put ourselves also into feel as be part of an imaginary world that actually we do not belong to, but they can exist in our mind. They can exist thanks to the imagination. That's why some authors say that storytelling contemplates reality and imagination. They can contemplate it separately or together, and that's why it can be a useful tool to explore the reality that surrounds us, but also to imagine new worlds that actually do not exist, but they hopefully could exist in the future. Who knows? Oh, let's say something more about the connection between storytelling and autism, and how we can use storytelling with autistic children. The use of storytelling as a tool to educate the discovery of one's and of others' emotion and to the implementation of adaptive behavior may seem inappropriate for children with autism, because the socialization, the communication problems they have could make think that probably storytelling is not the most appropriate tool to use as a prosocial narrative to discover reality and also new realities. And this is, someone could think that is true also for those kind of children with autism, which belong to the highest level of the autistic spectrum, according to what the DSM-4 and 5 says, the so-called Asperger's syndrome. It takes the name from the expert who studied this sort of syndrome a couple of decades ago. Here we have tried to summarize some of the main characteristics that a child with Asperger syndrome presents. And we have tried to focus these peculiarities according to the different areas of development that we can consider. About language, for example, language is usually acquired in time, but it presents wrong use of pronouns. For example, a child with Asperger prefers to use the second and the third person when he speaks. He quite rarely uses I would like to do that, but he says he does this and that. Okay? They have a repetitive and stereotype use of language. They repeat quite often the same thing. The presence of echolalia, they repeat the same word in a quite a stereotype way. Excessive interest in puns, games word, for example. Difficulty in understanding metaphor and double meanings when they use language. They are not able to understand the metaphoric meanings that stays behind the words. About nonverbal communication, they present lack of face expression, monotonous and exaggerated verbal tone, poor understanding of other people's expression and nonverbal messages, and they present resistance to change. This is a quite peculiar aspect of this kind of disability. In details, attention to repetitive and routine activities, rigid arrangement of object in the space. If you move something in the space, this kind of child put the object in the right position he thinks it should be. Poor perception of the passage of time and duration of activities. About other areas of development, for example, for motricity coordination, they present clumsiness, inadequate postures, stereotype movements quite often. They have a very limited amount of interest. And about social interaction, which is the area that probably is mostly compromised, they present inability to manage habitual social behavior in social contexts, relational problems linked to the dialectic of the gaze, to the rhythms and times of the speech, to the attention for the people they interact with. Inability to use appropriately social codes such as clothing and postures, lack of attention to the surrounding world during the early years of life is a sort of early sign that we can detach. Absence of communication and smiles, lack of interest in showing games and objects to parents, absence of symbolic games, and no involvement in peers interaction. This is just to show you that the social impairment they have in interacting with other people could make think that probably storytelling is not the effective tool to use with this sort of pupils. Instead of this, we consider that storytelling could be a specific way, a specific methodology, a specific instrument to work also with children with autism. And we have selected a specific kind, a specific type of storytelling that we find also in the international literature, the so-called social stories. Please put up your hands who thinks to know what social story is. Put up your hands who thinks to know what social story are. Okay, some of you have already heard talking about social stories. Yes, some of you did. Probably you have already met in your previous experience this sort of activity, methodology, and so on. Just to give you a general idea about what social stories are and what. Okay. Yeah. You had presented yesterday with Mariana's class. Yeah. She told me. Yeah. Social stories are highly structured narratives, so they are based on storytelling, functional to foster the construction of social relationships based on the understanding of the rules that underlie all types of relationships and interaction. And how can we use them? In children with autism, we are focusing on that. These kinds of stories serve to reduce aggressive behavior. It could be a problem. They could be aggressive sometimes. To teach social skills, appropriate attitudes, especially referred to school living, to acquire forms of greeting, to start play activities, to learn how to behave in specific contexts like home, school, and so on. Social stories are simple description. They have to be simple. They have to be understandable for children with autism. Hopefully more connected to their own experience. They can be supported by photos, drawings, or videos, as you can see in the example on the right of the slide, that serve to describe a person, an event, a concept, a social situation, and that guide the child towards the acquisition of a rule of conduct to be adopted to an ordinary social situation. In social story, narration helps children with autism to understand social situations that usually generate anxiety and stress, and probably that could end also with an aggressive behavior. Here you got some example about the phrase structure that we can put into a story like this, into a social stories. And this author has summarized 4 different types of phrases that can be used. We start with descriptive sentences, which provide information on who is involved in the story, where and when the facts occur, what happens and why. Here you have a possible example referred to school living situation. The bell rings when the school break is over. Children stand in line near the door. They wait for the teacher to come. This is what this author calls a descriptive sentence. We also have guidance sentence, give information how to behave, explaining to the child what is expected of him or her and how he or she should behave in a predetermined situation. And in this case, we usually use the first person. When the bell rings, I will try to stop what I was doing. I line up, I'll wait for the teacher to come. Okay? So it's better to use this sort of structure using the first person. Perspective sentencing, who are those sentences which describe what other people may feel or think. And in this case, you can see the connection with the empathic understanding that we mentioned before. In this case, the example could be the teacher will be happy to see all the children in line, and so you make a sort of reaction of what the teacher's feeling could be. Affirmative sentence, the last kind of sentence that we have considered, used to help the child remember the story and to reiterate the behavior to be acquired. Many people wear bike helmets. This is an intelligent thing to do, so I have to do that all the time I want to ride my bike, right? Just to give you a general idea about the phrase structure. We have already said that it would be better to write social story using the first person to put the child into the situation to identify himself with what the story is telling and with what the characters of the story are doing. Social stories shouldn't be reduced just to a list of behavior, do this and that, but they should present also a narrative plot capable of describing at least these four elements, these four aspects. The actions of the stories, the general idea that one wants to develop thanks to the story, the behavior that one wants to make acquire, the lesson to acquire, the purpose of the story, why we do this, why we want to use a social story to reach what objective. And we have selected a video because we think that visual education is useful in this case. And in this video, that is entitled Keep Your Hands to Yourself, probably someone of you who's familiar with YouTube has already seen it, is about school rules, but it's not just a list of comments, but it's a story, it's a social story with a narrative plot where all the four aspects we mentioned in the previous slide are considered, and which is a quite effective example of what a social story could be. So let's see all together.
Simon says, put your hands over your ears. Simon says, stand on one foot. Now jump. Simon didn't say, put your hands over your ears.
You got me. Now it's my turn. Simon says, put your arms out like an airplane. Simon says, touch your friend's nose.
Sorry.
Simon says, put your hands over your ears. Simon says, stand on one foot. Now jump. Simon didn't say.
Aw, man, you got me. Now it's my turn. Simon says, put your arms out like an airplane. Simon says, touch your friend's nose.
Chris?
What's wrong, Dee?
It's best to keep your hands to yourself, even when we're playing a game.
Keep your hands to yourself? What do you mean?
Let me tell you. Yesterday at recess, Maria and I were pretending to be animals, and it was fun until Maria said that monkeys like to tickle each other. And then she started to tickle me. But I didn't like it. I don't want to be tickled. And then in class, she touched my hairband without asking me. She said she wanted to feel it, but she didn't ask me first. She just did it. And then, when we played in the sandbox after school, she wanted to borrow my shovel. She just took it from me without asking first. She didn't keep her hands to herself all day.
What did you do?
Well, I told Maria that she wasn't keeping her hands to herself. I said that it's not nice to touch other people without asking first. She said she was sorry, and she didn't know that it bothered me. And then she promised to keep her hands to herself from now on. She wanted to make it a pinky promise, but she asked me if it was okay first. And I gladly said yes.
Oh, now I understand what it means to keep your hands to yourself. Thanks, Dee.
You're welcome, Chris.
So, do you want to keep playing Simon Says? I have a good direction from Simon.
Sure.
Simon says, keep your hands to yourself.
That's a good one.
Okay. Good. If you want to see more videos, here we have a list that we have selected for you, so you can become more familiar with social stories. Some references, and thank you so much. Any questions?
Questions? Very interesting. Well, I just want to consider, yes, very interesting, especially for this sector of society that I find it difficult to have it represented in the classrooms, or at least to have paying attention in the classrooms, which is a so-called minority, which is in this case autism and Asperger. Do you have any questions, any suggestions? Yeah.
Someone of you probably has already experienced a social story in the class of yesterday, so probably you had the chance to live on your own the pros and cons of using this sort of methodology of tools with children.
Well, we had this instruction in the classroom, which was writing a story, creating a story in 20 minutes. Well, this is, as always, we have a problem in the classroom, so I have to invent a story. In my mind, this is what the creative storytelling classroom is devoted to. And then the instruction, the title or subtitle instruction was taking how to take a shower. Yeah, or the problem or the issue of taking a shower, right? And then just revolve around this topic, right? And then there were really different stories coming up. So we just made some groupings of 2-3 people in the classroom, and then Mariana Piccioli was just supervising everything and then analyzing the results, which were really interesting after all. Well, I have a question, if it's fine for you. Well, if you don't mind to answer, it's what do you think? Do you think that classrooms are prepared for autism and Asperger pupils? As for didactics in relation to storytelling, do you think that classrooms are prepared for that? For instance, do you think that materials referring to storybooks or books themselves are socialized and shared enough in the school, inside the classrooms, in primary schools precisely? Do you think so?
Yeah, well, let me tell you that storytelling and this specific kind of storytelling, social story, are useful not just for children with autism. They can be used with this kind of children, but we can be used with anybody. We come from Italy, and but like many other countries, we pay a lot of attention in school inclusion, I think, since the 60s of the last century. So also our methodology first of all, are developed with children with disability, and then are used also with the rest of the group class. We got a lot of material. We do a lot of research in this field, and yeah, you can say we are trying to develop quite materials on these sort of tools for integrating children with Asperger's syndrome, and yes, we are starting to have a quite sufficient amount of material to use. We use at the University of Florence, for example. Mariana works also in the course for support teachers, and we are trying to spread this sort of methodology and material, starting from pre-service and training, initial training activities, just because we want to make known this sort of approach to all the new teachers that will enter into school, but also those who are already in service teacher use it quite often. They start to be used with children with disability, and then they are used also with the rest of the class. I don't know if you want to add something, Mariana. Would you like to say something in Catalan?
My English is awful.
Oh, you can
I
speak
can
Catalan.
speak English, so I speak Catalan, vale? És més fàcil per mi. Lo sé.
We will try to translate what he's going to
In
say.
italiano? In italiano come si fa?
Sì.
Vai, vabbè. In Italia non abbiamo scuole speciali. In Italia non ci sono classi differenziali. Tutti sono alla scuola ordinaria, tutti. E l'innovazione metodologica la pensiamo per i ragazzi e i bambini che hanno problemi. Se funziona poi la usiamo per tutti.
That's the beauty of special. That's the beauty of special needs education. That what is it open? So this is the beauty of special need education and inclusion. That something that works for special needs students will work with no special needs students. And individual difference research shows that every learner has special needs.
To the single pupil.
Exactly. And I think it's
com'è la personalizzazione?
We personalize the
exactly.
the learning process.
Individualize, ma personalize.
And differentiate.
Yeah.
So, I speak English.
Very good. Thank you for your contribution.
Okay. We are in a pedagogical context. Right. We are learning from each other. Okay. Well, thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your contribution. Thank you.